The resume had everything. 8 years of experience in the exact role, a degree from a university the hiring manager recognized, 3 professional references typed neatly at the bottom. It took 2 minutes to decide it was not a fit. I was sitting in the screening room with 4 other panel members. It was the 6th interview of the day. The manager across from me was not reading the resume anymore. He was watching the candidate, and his face had already closed. The candidate was qualified. The candidate was answering the questions, but something about the interaction felt like work. And by the time we reached the 3rd question, the manager had checked out. We rejected that candidate before the door closed. Not because the credentials were wrong, because the person made the process feel harder than it needed to be. Hiring is not a test of your resume. It is a psychological event, and the interviewer is tired, distracted, and looking for a reason to move on. If you understand that, you control the entire conversation from the moment you walk in. But these 6 principles will not work if you are applying for roles you are fundamentally unqualified for. They tilt the odds when you are in the viable candidate pool. They do not create qualifications you do not have. My name is Desmond Ray. I spent 28 years in corporate talent acquisition, first as a recruiter and later running candidate screening for a multinational's regional offices. I was the person who read the resume first, ran the phone screen, and decided whose file moved to the next stage and who's got the standard rejection email. I sat on hiring panels for thousands of roles. I wrote the internal notes that never made it back to the applicant. I know which words in a debrief actually mean no. The 6 principles I am going to show you are the mechanisms I watched work in those rooms. They are what hiring managers are actually deciding in the first 15 seconds. And once you know that, you can control it. Interviewers form strong initial judgments in 7 to 15 seconds. That is before you finish your greeting, before you sit down. The decision about whether you are worth considering is already forming, and it is not based on what you know. It is based on how you make them feel in that narrow window. What are they judging? Not your credentials. They are judging ease of interaction. They are judging confidence. They are judging whether you seem like extra work. The hiring manager is tired. They have been in interviews all morning. They are not looking for reasons to hire you. They are looking for reasons to eliminate you, because elimination is faster. I watched this in every panel. Candidates who smiled, made eye contact, and matched the interviewer's energy level were rated higher, even when they fumbled answers later. The panel would say, "I could see them on the team," or "they felt like a good fit." And when I went back through my notes, those candidates had not given better answers than the others. They had simply made the interviewer feel at ease in the first minute. So what do you do in those first seconds? You walk in, you offer a firm handshake, you make eye contact, you smile briefly, just enough to signal that you are comfortable being there. You greet them in an unhurried way, like you are meeting a colleague, not auditioning for permission to exist in the room. And before they ask the first question, you say one brief, warm remark that acknowledges them as a person. Something like, "Thank you for taking the time today," not a speech. Just one sentence that shows you see them as a human being who is doing you a courtesy. What you do not do is apologize for being nervous. You do not launch into your background before being asked. You do not overthank them or fill the silence with unnecessary words. All of those behaviors signal that you are unsure, that you need reassurance, that you are going to be work. You are not trying to impress them in 15 seconds. You are making them feel at ease with you. That is a completely different goal, and it is the one that actually determines whether they keep listening. The myth is simple. The most qualified candidate on paper gets the job. I watched that myth break thousands of times. A candidate with 12 years of experience, 3 certifications, and a resume that matched every line of the job description would sit across from me, and by the end of the interview, the panel would choose someone else, someone with half the credentials. Someone who had only worked in the field for 4 years. The decision was not random, it was psychological. Hiring decisions are approximately 80% driven by psychology and only 20% by skills and experience. How you make someone feel outweighs what you can do. Here is what cognitive ease means. The hiring manager is overwhelmed. They are running back-to-back interviews. Their mental bandwidth is not infinite. They are gravitating toward the candidate who feels easiest to work with, the one who does not make them work to understand the answer. The one who does not leave them confused about what you actually did in your last role. The one who does not force them to ask the same question 3 times. Cognitive ease is the feeling that this person will not be a problem. That is what they are screening for. What does cognitive ease look like in practice? Clear answers, no rambling. You anticipate their next question. You do not make them work to follow your train of thought. When they ask about a project you led, you do not start with background on the company, or the history of the department, or the political context. You say what the project was, what you did, and what the result was. That structure is context, action, result. It is how the brain wants to receive information, and when you deliver it that way, the interviewer relaxes. I watched candidates who structured their answers like that get rated as articulate, even when other candidates gave more detail. The panel would say they were clear or they knew how to explain things, and the candidate who gave more detail would get described as hard to follow or a little all over the place. The difference was not intelligence, it was friction. So practice speaking in short, complete thoughts, no filler words, no backtracking, no searching for the right word while you say and the interviewer waits. You do not need to sound polished, you need to sound clear. That means thinking for 2 seconds before you answer, not while you answer. It means stopping at the end of a thought instead of adding "and also" 3 times in a row. You are reducing friction in their day. You are making their job easier, and that feeling transfers directly to how they rate you as a candidate. It does not matter if someone else in the room had better credentials. If you made them feel like you would be easy to onboard, easy to manage, easy to work with, you are the one who moves forward. People follow through on verbal commitments. Once someone says something out loud in front of another person, they are far more likely to do it. You say you will call by Friday, and now there is pressure to call by Friday. You commit to a timeline in a meeting, and that timeline becomes the thing you are accountable for. That same principle applies to hiring. Most candidates leave the interview without clarity on what happens next. They assume the hiring manager will reach out, and then they wait. A week passes, 2 weeks. They send a follow-up email, and it goes unanswered. They were not rejected. They were simply forgotten because the hiring manager never committed to doing anything specific. I watched this happen in screening room after screening room. A candidate would finish the interview, shake hands, say thank you, and walk out. The panel would discuss them briefly, say something like, "We will get back to them," and then move on to the next file. No timeline, no action. The decision got delayed. Other candidates came through. The original candidate became part of a stack of maybes that never got revisited. But the candidates who asked a direct question at the end of the interview, the ones who said, "When should I expect to hear back?" Or "What are the next steps from here?" Those candidates received decisions faster. They were less likely to be ghosted, not because they were more qualified, because they forced the hiring manager to commit to a time frame, out loud, in front of them. Here is how you apply it. In the final 2 minutes of the interview, after they ask if you have any questions, you ask one specific question that requires them to give you a date or an action. You do not ask, "Do you have any other questions for me?" You do not ask, "What did you think of my answers?" You ask something that makes them state what happens next and when. What that sounds like is this: "What is your timeline for making a decision?" Or, "Should I follow up if I have not heard back by next Friday?" Either of those questions forces them to give you a verbal commitment. They might say, "We will have a decision by the end of the week." It does not matter what the exact timeline is. What matters is that they said it in front of you, and now their brain registers that as a commitment. The hiring manager is not trying to deceive you. They are just busy, and decisions slip unless there is pressure to make them. When you ask for a timeline, you create that pressure, not aggressive pressure, just the small psychological weight of having said something out loud that they now need to honor. You are not leaving the room without clarity. You are not hoping they remember to follow up. You are giving them a specific commitment to keep, and that commitment moves you out of the maybe pile and into the category of candidates who require a response. Hiring managers give preference to referrals for every open position. That is policy, written or unwritten, in every company I worked for across 28 years. A referred candidate starts with built-in trust. The hiring manager does not know you, but they know the person who sent your resume, and that person's judgment becomes a proxy for yours. The myth is that you need to know someone to get a referral. You need a friend at the company. You need a former colleague who moved to that organization. That is what most people believe, and it stops them from even trying. Actually, you can create referrals through cold outreach. I watched this work dozens of times. A candidate would reach out to someone at the company, have a brief conversation, and that person would pass their resume to the hiring manager with a note that said, "Someone reached out, seems interested, thought you should see this." That lukewarm referral was enough to move the resume to the top of the pile. Here is how you manufacture a referral when you have no network. You identify someone at the company through a LinkedIn search by job title. You are not looking for the hiring manager. You are looking for someone who works in the same department or a related role, someone who would know what the day-to-day looks like. You send them a brief, specific message, not, "Can you refer me?" That approach fails because it asks for a favor before you have built any rapport. Instead, you ask one informed question about the role or the team. What that message looks like is this: I am applying for the operations analyst role and noticed you work in the logistics department. What has your experience been with cross-team collaboration there? Or, I saw the posting for the project coordinator position. I am curious how the team handles competing deadlines, since that seems to be a big part of the role. The question needs to be specific enough that it shows you did research. It needs to be open-ended enough that they can answer it in 2 sentences. And it needs to be about the work, not about you. Why does this work? Because the question is easy to answer, and most people like talking about their own experience. If they respond positively, you have rapport. You reply. Thank them for the insight. Mention that you are planning to apply, and then you ask if they would be comfortable passing your resume to the hiring manager. You do not demand it. You frame it as optional. If you think it makes sense, I would appreciate it. If not, no problem at all. That phrasing removes pressure, and people are far more likely to help when they do not feel cornered. Even a lukewarm referral gets your resume to the top of the pile. The hiring manager opens it because someone they work with sent it. You are no longer one of 200 applications sitting in an automated system. You are the person their colleague mentioned. You do this before you apply. A referral after you have already been rejected does nothing. The system has already processed you. You are in the no pile. But if you build the referral first and then you apply, your resume arrives with context already attached. People favor those who reflect their own beliefs back to them. It is how the brain recognizes alignment. When someone hears their own values spoken in your words, it feels like proof that you belong. Hiring managers call this cultural fit, and it outweighs credentials in almost every close decision I ever watched. Here's how it shows up. The interviewer asks why you want to work at this company. They are listening for whether you share their beliefs, whether the things they care about are the things you care about. Most candidates answer that question with generic praise. They say they have always admired the company, or they respect the work the company does. Those answers say nothing. They could apply to any company. The candidates I watched succeed were the ones who referenced the company's stated mission or values in their answers, and did it in a way that felt specific. They said, I have followed your work in accessibility design, and I respect that this company prioritizes making products usable for everyone, not just the majority. That matches how I approach my own work. They were not inventing values. They were finding the values the company had already written down and reflecting them back. And in the debrief notes, those candidates were described as a great cultural fit, even when their technical skills were average. It works because the interviewer hears their own belief system coming out of your mouth, and that feels like alignment. It feels like you already understand what matters here. So how do you find the beliefs to mirror? You start with the company website, the mission statement, the about page. You read the LinkedIn posts from leadership. What are they celebrating? You check Glassdoor reviews and look for repeated themes. If 3 reviews mention that the company values autonomy or collaboration, that is a belief the company holds about itself. You take one of those beliefs and you weave it into your answer when they ask why you want to work there. You use their exact language if possible. If the company says they prioritize transparency, you say transparency. If they say they value long-term thinking, you say long-term thinking. You do not paraphrase. You mirror the exact phrasing they use to describe themselves, because that is the language their brain is already tuned to recognize. What that sounds like in practice is this: I have followed your work in sustainable supply chains, and I respect that this company prioritizes environmental impact alongside profitability. That matches how I approach logistics decisions. Or, I saw that your team values transparency in client relationships, and that is something I have built my own practice around. You are not making a speech. You are stating one belief, tying it to the company, and then tying it back to yourself. One sentence, clear, direct. Using their language. In the morning, right not notch. They are listening for resonance. They want to feel like you get it, like you already speak the language of the team. That feeling of alignment is what they mean when they say cultural fit. And cultural fit is the deciding factor in every hiring decision where 2 candidates are equally qualified on paper. What you do not do is offer generic praise. You do not say you have always admired the company's innovation or its leadership in the industry. Those phrases mean nothing. You also do not make up values that are not there. You mirror what they have already said about themselves. You are speaking their language. You are showing them that you see what they value and that you value it too. And when the panel sits down after the interview to decide who moves forward, they will say, you felt like a fit. The myth is that you need to meet every requirement in a job posting to be considered. Most candidates read the list, count the skills they do not have, and close the tab. They disqualify themselves before anyone else gets the chance. I watched that happen for 28 years, and it cost qualified people thousands of opportunities they never even applied for. The reality is that very few candidates meet every single qualification. Hiring managers expect this. Job postings are wish lists, not strict requirements. I reviewed thousands of resumes where candidates met 60 to 70% of the listed requirements and still moved to interviews. What mattered was not perfect alignment. What mattered was relevant transferable skills and genuine interest in the role. Why are job postings written this way? Because HR compiles the list from multiple stakeholders. The hiring manager wants someone who can manage client accounts. The department head wants someone with experience in a specific software platform. The team lead wants someone who has worked in a fast-paced environment. Each person adds their ideal criteria to the list, and by the time the posting goes live, it describes a candidate who does not exist. The hiring manager knows this. They are not expecting perfection. They are expecting someone who can do the core work and learn the rest. What hiring managers actually prioritize is potential, enthusiasm, cultural fit, and ability to learn, not perfect credential matching. I sat in debrief rooms where the panel chose the candidate with fewer years of experience because that candidate asked better questions, or seemed more excited about the work, or gave an answer that showed they understood the problem the team was trying to solve. The other candidate, the one with all the credentials, had checked every box on paper, but in the room, they felt flat. They did not seem curious. And so the offer went to the candidate with gaps, because gaps can be filled and enthusiasm cannot be taught. So how do you apply when you have gaps? You acknowledge the gap briefly if asked, and then you pivot to a transferable skill or relevant experience that shows you can close it quickly. You do not apologize. You do not dwell on what you do not know. You show them what you do know that applies, and you demonstrate that you have learned similar things before. What that sounds like is this. I have not used Salesforce, but I learned HubSpot in 3 weeks on my last project, and I am confident I can do the same here. Or, I have not managed a team of 10, but I led a cross-functional project with 8 people last year, and the dynamics were similar. You are not pretending the gap does not exist. You are showing them that the gap is smaller than it looks. Apply if you meet 60% or more of the requirements. You are not wasting anyone's time. Hiring managers want to fill the role, and if you can do the job and you want to be there, you are already ahead of half the applicants who meet every line on paper but show up to the interview with no energy and no questions. The hiring manager is not looking for perfection. They are looking for someone who can do the job and who they want to work with. If you meet most of the requirements and you show them you can learn the rest, you are that person. I was sitting in the debrief room with 3 other panel members. We had just finished interviewing the final candidate for a senior operations role. There were 3 folders on the table, 3 resumes. All 3 candidates were qualified. All 3 had answered the questions, but only one was getting the offer, and the decision took less than 5 minutes. Candidate A had the most experience on paper, 10 years in operations, 2 certifications, a degree from a well-known program. But when the hiring manager started talking, he did not mention any of that. He said the candidate was hard to read, a little stiff. The answers were fine, but there was no energy. When we asked why they wanted the role, they gave a generic answer about career growth. The hiring manager said, I just could not get a sense of whether they actually wanted to be here. And that was the end of the conversation about candidate A. Candidate B had mid-level experience, 7 years in the field, no certifications, but they came in as a referral. One of the team leads had passed their resume along after a brief conversation on LinkedIn. The candidate smiled when they walked in. They asked good questions about the team structure. And at the end, when we asked why they wanted to work here, they said they had followed the company's work in process automation and respected that we prioritized long-term efficiency over quick fixes. That was language pulled directly from the mission statement on our website. The hiring manager wrote good cultural fit in his notes, and the rest of the panel nodded. Candidate C had the least experience, 5 years, but the panel kept using the same words. Easy to talk to, enthusiastic, clear answers. One panel member said, I could see them on the team, and another said, they would be easy to onboard. No one mentioned their lack of certifications. No one questioned whether they had enough years in the role. The conversation was about how they made people feel. The hiring manager went quiet for a moment, then said, I think we go with B. The referral had given them initial trust. The cognitive ease kept them in the running. The mirroring of our values sealed it. The decision was unanimous. I opened my notes file and typed B felt like the right fit. There was no mention of a skills comparison, no rubric, just how the candidate made the panel feel in the room and whether we could picture working with them every day. That is the lesson. All 6 principles work together. You do not need to be the most qualified person who applies. You need to control the psychological variables that hiring managers actually use to decide. First impressions, cognitive ease, verbal commitments, referrals, mirroring beliefs, and applying even when you have gaps. Those are the mechanisms. They stack, they compound. And when you use all of them, you are the candidate the panel remembers. But these principles work best when you are genuinely qualified for the role. They will not overcome a fundamental skills mismatch or turn a junior candidate into a senior one. What they do is tilt the odds in your favor when you are already in the viable pool. I want to know which principle surprised you most, or which one you plan to use first. Leave a comment and tell me. If you want to know what to write in the follow-up email after the interview, or how to negotiate salary without losing the offer, I will cover both of those in the next video. It is the natural next step after today. The single most important takeaway is this: hiring is 80% psychology. Once you understand that, you shape more of the process than most candidates realize. You are not at the mercy of the resume screener or the hiring committee. You are influencing how they feel about you from the moment you walk in, and that feeling is what moves you from maybe to yes. Hiring is a human process. It is not a meritocracy. The person who gets the job is not always the most qualified. It is the person who understands how decisions actually get made in the debrief room and who knows how to influence those decisions. You know that now. Use it.